Hi, my name is Daniel Geist. I'm a co-founder and the art and tech director at EDFilms, and I'm finally back with a new tutorial after a very long time away from YouTube. Over the last few years, I've been working on a short film, Return to Harry Hill, and I have learned a ton. In this video, I thought what we would do is explore the process that we went through in taking our Photoshop files and bringing them into Maya by using a tool that we developed in-house to try to mimic or replicate the Photoshop to After Effects experience as closely as possible, with the added benefit of using modern 3D animation tools. Okay, so I thought what we would do is take a look at a background that I actually used in the film and show you how I get it into Maya using PSDto3D as quickly as possible without getting too lost in the details of how it all works and all the different settings. I just want to show you the process so you can understand what it takes when you kind of know what you're doing. It's a pretty simple thing to do, but it requires a little bit of explanation if you want to get into the weeds, and I think we just need to take a look and see how it goes. So I'm going to get rid of my face so we don't have to look at that while we go through the process. So if you take a look at this file, you'll see that it's pretty clean. This is exactly how I would set something up to be used in After Effects, but this time we're going to send it over to Maya. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open our PSD exporter, and I'm going to set the expansion to 20. I'll explain to you what that does in just a second. I'm going to run the PS code, and I'm going to put my file where I want it because it's going to create a duplicate of the file. We're not going to actually be using the original. It'll make something new. When I'm using Maya, I like to put my images in the source images folder. Okay, and we're going to name this E, and we're going to export. So what you'll see is all of a sudden these blue lines will start appearing around everything. This is the boundary line for the mesh. This is being created in Photoshop. It's a curve. That boundary line is being created at 20 pixels away from the last alpha pixel in the layer itself. If I set this higher, this boundary would be greater. So you'll see what that looks like when we get inside of Maya. All right, so I've run the script. I've got my file made. So the next thing to do is to open up the generator, and let's import the file. Comes in pretty fast. So what you'll see is each layer name as it was written in Photoshop. I spelled rabbit wrong. And the layer size. So this is how big the layer is based on its alpha channel. And then right now I have the mode selected, which is the geometry mode, and it's set to billboard. We'll explore the other options in just a minute, but for now we're going to be using billboard mode. I'm going to set the depth up between layers to be 15 and the mesh scale to be 10. You can experiment. You'll have your own preference as you do this more and more. Now we're ready to go. There's nothing really much more we need to do. We can say to generate the mesh and the PNGs. I can select all. It will do just that. Okay, great. Everything has come in. Let's click on this and press F. There we go. We can now see the whole thing. I have to press 6 to actually get the textures visible. Now, right now they seem really overblown, and that's because they're being brought in as raw. And if you want them to, if you want to stay in sRGB like Rec 709 and fix your gamma, you have to do it on the texture itself. So if we go to here, you have to change this to Rec 709. But I want to keep it simple and straightforward. We're just going to work in raw for now. You may also notice there's a lot of flickering happening. Now this can be remedied by going up here and changing it to depth peeling. I like to put the quality to 1, transparent shadows, which means the shadows will be cast based on the alpha channel. And now we don't have any flickering. The only other thing you might notice is that the textures look a little bit blown out, and that's because the materials have a full-on ambient color going on at max, and this is so it looks more flat shaded, I guess. We should probably fix that. So I'm going to go into my hyper shader and fix each one of these materials. I won't make you watch me do this, but the problem is right now is I have a lot of materials. So let me show you what's actually happening under the hood here. You'll see that the PSDto3D wrote a unique PNG for every single layer that we exported from Photoshop. And you don't always have to work this way. We actually have texture atlases, which would allow you to group layers together so that there's not so much material management to do. So if we look at this background here, you'll see that we only have 3 PNG files. Now these are bigger, but they're also organized into an atlas. And this makes material management a lot simpler, but it also comes with its own workflows that you have to be considerate of. So right now we have a material and a texture for every single layer, which means if we have an issue with it, we have to adjust it in every single material. Okay, so I've fixed all the materials. Next thing I want to do is we're going to add a camera really quickly. There we go. We got a camera, and I'm going to make it an 80mm lens. Let's go into the camera here, zoom out. So I've already put depth between layers. This makes it just a little bit easier to work with the layers because they've been separated a little bit. So I'm going to set my camera up really quickly. Let's put on our, this here. There we go. Probably want to start around here. We haven't positioned any objects yet, of course, but I'm going to just start by setting up a really basic camera move to give me something to work towards. There we go. Okay, so you can see we've got a camera moving. That's awesome. So I'm going to split this scene in two. So I've got two panels to work with. One with the camera, and then, let's set this to raw, and then the other for our isometric mode. So I want to, let's take some of these little rock characters here. First thing I'll do is I'm going to just center the pivot on all these objects. I've got some of my own little shelf things set up. This shelf actually comes with the script when you install it. Okay, so let's move these characters a bit closer to the camera, because let's say we're going to look at them and then we're going to move past them to reveal the rest of the scene. So we'll just start by having them in the scene like this. So you can see pretty quickly we're already doing what you would be able to do inside of After Effects, and we're doing it faster in many ways. Okay, I might change this camera to bring it more that way. There we go. I think I have auto key on, so it should just automatically keyframe. Cool. Okay, and I'm going to stick the house way further in the distance, and let's turn off these mobile pieces. I'm not going to have time to set these all up in this video, but we could always pull them out at any point. Scale this house way up. Maybe push it down a little bit. Eventually we're going to play with all these different landscape pieces. I'm going to push this even further away. Scale it up more. Okay. And I think something I'll show you that you can do, it's really far away. We're not going to get much parallax on this, but if you really wanted to, you could actually modify this geometry really quickly, especially in Maya. I'm sure there's lots of ways to do it in every program. I'm just going to focus on this. We're going to do multi-cut. I'm just going to draw a line right here. And then I'm going to grab this and I'm going to push it into the distance. And then I'm going to scale it out a little bit. And then I'm going to scale it up. It's going to look a little weird initially because it's actually triangulating the geometry in order to make this work. The reason I'm scaling it up is so that we don't get so much shift in perspective. You actually want it to look more like a square when you do this kind of thing, this kind of camera projection. So if you don't want it to get all distorted, you just have to add a couple of extra, you have to add extra divisions in it. Okay, and if I do this, it should get rid of some of those distortions. But the cool thing about this is we now have a little more parallax on the house. It's going to be pretty subtle for a shot like this, but it is something. And you can also use it for lighting purposes. So you can see it's probably a little bit extreme, honestly. It's it's a huge shift. I'm just going to use this really quickly and change this. But I think right now we're already out of the realm of what After Effects is capable of, at least initially. So we're already doing things that this would have to be split into two separate layers, and it's not something you would easily do inside of After Effects. So now we've got some parallax on that building. All right, and now what I want to do is let's add a little bit more structure to these characters here. So let's go down to this character. Let's say we wanted to rig them or do, sculpt them a little bit. So let's open this and we want to find which character this is. It's Rock A. So I'll just go down and find Rock A. There it is. And I'm going to change it from Billboard to Delani. Now the initial settings, maybe they're good enough. Let's just go regenerate the mesh. And you can see that I now have a triangulated mesh around that character. So if you look at these numbers, they're kind of relative. The outer detail is currently set to 50. That means there's going to be it just tells you what the density of the vertices around the perimeter is going to be. The inner detail is how many rows of these vertices you're going to have. And then this inner fall off is how quickly it degenerates into larger faces. So let's put this up to 70 and 70, and we'll put a inner fall off at 10, and I'm just going to regenerate the mesh. So this looks a little bit more like the density that I might want to be using. I could actually rig the little top of the character's head. In fact, maybe we want to go a little higher for that, and then that means we could actually put some bones in there and make that little the little beads wobble around. The other thing we can do now that this character is all set up, let's go into one view mode. We can actually sculpt this out. So I just have this sculpt tool already set up. I'll make it nice and big, and I can start pulling out some of this geometry. There we go. And you can see within minutes we're really quite out of the realm of what After Effects is even remotely capable of doing. There. Okay. Not perfect. I'm not spending really much time on it, honestly, but that gives us a little bit of a sculpt on that character. We've got some definition in the rocks, and we could do that on all of these different characters. The other object I'll show you really quickly is we could take this tree piece, for instance, tree rotting light. Let's go find that. There it is. And let's also set it to Delani. And I think this tool is especially good for trees, at least for me, because I do them so much. And for this project, there was a lot. We'll put this at 70, generate the mesh. And what I like to do with trees is I'll take the edge, click here, and double click all the way down here. So now you can see I got like this edge line here. We'll just hide this. And I'm going to go into the tool settings, and we're going to turn on soft selection. It's way too big at the moment, so I'm holding B down and sliding my mouse to the left. And what I want to do is I want to create this kind of inverse curve like this. Great. And now, if we expand this out a little bit more, probably to about there. Now if I push this in, I'm going to get this really natural curve here. Okay, so I'm going to do another one over here. There we go. And let's push this one in too. So now we've got kind of a cylinder thing happening. All right. Now what we could do is we could further sculpt this. So let's go down to the bottom edge here. I'm going to pull that out a bit. I don't know if we really have to because we're not going to really see it. Okay, that's great. And then now what I'll do is grab my sculpting brush. Is it far too large perhaps? There it is. And we can sculpt out some of this detail here. And if I look at the trunk itself, the drawing, I've got this little knot sticking out. So let's just make this smaller. I'm just holding the B button, the B key down, and sliding my mouse, clicking, sliding, and clicking. There we go. And I could sculpt in a little bit of chunky details here and there and smooth it out, whatever. There we go. It's probably set really high. Strength is pretty high for this. Great. But as you can see, I've created some pretty significant depth out of this layer. So let's go back into our camera really quickly. There we go. The depth is reading. It's subtle because the camera is it's a longer lens, but you will read that, and lighting will also affect things. So maybe that's something we can do really quickly in just a moment. Other thing we might want to do is take some of these layers. So we'll open both views again. Okay. And what I'm going to do is take a couple of these little bushy layers here, and I'm just going to start duplicating it all over the place to just fill out the scene. So this is something I do a lot in After Effects, but it can be pretty slow. It can be a bit of a slow process just because you have to RAM render a lot to see what's going on, and that can be, very time consuming. So I do really enjoy working like this just for the speed gains you get in general. It makes for a lot more of an intuitive workflow. And of course, I can import other paintings, other Photoshop files as well. So as I get further along, if I'm like, oh, I need more pieces, I can just make a new Photoshop file. You could even update the Photoshop file and then just update the layer count, and you'd be able to do that too. Okay, so I've got these little characters down here. I don't want to get too crazy because I could spend a lot of time messing around, getting this looking really as good as possible. I just want to give you a basic idea of how to work with the different layers. I've got these like rock layers back here. Maybe the house is on a rocky, kind of a rocky edge. So what I do with my layers often is I'll paint a top and a bottom, or a top and a side, with kind of equal lighting on both top and the bottom. And what that does is it allows me to take multiple pieces, and then I can rotate them like this and flip them over and get more out of them. So now I can stack those together, and I can start creating more variety in the terrain if I want to. So once you put enough of them, they actually get hard to notice the patterns a little bit, especially if you paint them in a certain way. But so you can see I can get all of this extra depth out of this. So if we move the camera, I'm going to be getting more and more depth out of these layers that I'm just duplicating over and over again. I think I'm seeing a little bit of tiling. And then now I would go back and then just grab couple more of these. I could even take some of these layers too. I mean, I do have lots of layers to work with, and I could, of course, like I just said, is I could make a whole bunch more and just bring them into the environment. So you see, if I duplicate this and I flip it over, one thing I sometimes do too is I'll make bright pieces and dark pieces, so pieces that are lit and pieces that are in shadow, and that can be really useful to help bring highlights and lowlights to your environments. So there we go. I'll show you just adding a light source really quick. So I'm going to go here, I'll create, and we'll just do like we'll do a point light. Okay, where is our point light? There it is. So we're going to press 7 inside of here, and we're going to see that, look, we got lighting. And because we sculpted these characters a little bit and these objects, we actually get light fall off. So you could play with toon shaders to actually modify the lighting a little bit. So I tend to paint, if I really want to use the 3D lighting, I tend to paint the objects without much environment light, like no direct sunlight. And it's more kind of the ambient light from the space. And that if you use that, what you can do is you can use a lot more lighting. So that can be really interesting. And you can actually use some of these textures to create bump maps and anything else, or displacement maps. And then you get a little bit more variety on it. But let's just throw a light in here for now. I can actually put a decay on this light. So we'll put a linear decay, put this at 100. And we'll bring a light out by the house, I suppose. I don't know. Let's put one out here. It's pretty far away. Might have to make it a little bit bigger, brighter. There, we have a really bright light on the house now, so we can make it look like we have, I don't know, some kind of, that's where the light's coming from. And then if we duplicate that light and we bring it back over here, we can make the foreground light, let's say we make it a little darker and we make it a bit cooler, just for this example. So now we're doing that kind of that thing where you create a really cool, dark, contrasty foreground, and you have your background element in warmer light. I guess this light looks warmer, even though it's just flat white. But anyways, so that gives us, you're already seeing like the potential of what you can do with basic lights and really simple geometry. So there you go. We've got a big camera move. We've bent some surfaces. You could start rigging all of these things to get different movements going on and everything. So that's like a really quick overview of how this can work. So what I'll show you next is what you can do if you want to actually deal with some texture atlasing, and that allows you to actually have less material management to deal with. As you can see, these textures are fairly small, and we don't want to, in this version, create 1,000,001 different textures. So I'm going to just open a different file. We'll use this one instead, and we'll pull this file open. So we don't have any texture atlases set up yet, but what I want to do is, since these are so small, I'm going to select a bunch of them and group them together. So I'm putting them together based on their size right now. I'm going to take all of the mobile, the house, the rocks, and the dolls and stick them all together. I'm not going to do the big logs here because they're actually quite large. So we've got all the dolls so far, and I think that'll be about it. Okay, so I've got them all selected, so I'm going to select create a new group, and I'm going to name it really quick, just mobile, rocks, dolls, house. Just a simple name. And as you can see, my atlas is actually quite small. It's not bigger than 3K. So that's actually really awesome. I'm going to set up another one for these bushels in the rock moss. So we'll go this, and we'll say new group, bushels, rock, moss. Boop, there we go. And what else do we have here? Okay, and then I think the last thing we have are the string and the two big trees. I'm putting them together because they're quite large, but I know they all fit together. So you can see the string is really long, not very tall, and then these two are fairly large in general. So we'll put them together, new group, and we'll call it trees string. Boop, there we go. So that atlas is 4K, roughly 4019 by 4019. So we know that that all fits just fine. I think what we can do with these here, this atlas, is I don't want to make one that's actually 2983 by 2983 because it's not a power of 2 texture size. So I'm going to override that and I'm going to set it to 4096. And what it's going to tell me is that it's going to pad it by 1113 pixels, which means it's a bit inefficient. There's a bunch of empty space. If we really wanted to, maybe we could try to add another object to it and see what that does. So maybe we can take the string and see, let's take the string and actually let's move that one to mobile rocks and whatever else, and we'll see what happens. So the padding has gone down, the string is added, so that's good. We're not wasting as much. And we've increased the optimal size. Optimal meaning that it's not scaling it up. It's not adding padding and it's not scaling it down. So that's pretty cool. We can just put it that way. And then these ones here, we'll just set the rock moss, the atlas, to override it to 4096. Great. I think that's all of them. What do we have? We just want to make sure that this one is set to 4096, override to 4096. Now this is mostly important when you're using game engines or real-time renderers. I think it's less important when you're using more of a cinema rendering engine. Doesn't really care as much about power of 2 textures that I'm aware of, but I feel like they're probably render more efficiently no matter what. Okay, so now that we put that together, I'm going to generate the mesh and the PNGs. I think all these settings are just the same, so we'll just spit them out. So now that we've grouped them together into atlases, it means we're going to have a lot less materials that we have to manage. So there we go. We can see all of them here. And I'll show you in the file structure. We've looked at old ones here. We'll have a look and you'll see that we've created texture atlases this time. We've also kept all the old textures. Now this may not be desirable for you. We are looking at a way to actually clean out unwanted textures that you might be done with. So these can just be deleted. But the thing is if we just start deleting them, sometimes what that will do is if you have an old save file, you're going to lose those textures. So it's a little bit tricky. We're trying to figure out how to manage that better. But what you can see is we've got our atlases all set up and they're nicely organized and generally fairly efficient, or as efficient as they can be, because we only allow ourselves to rotate islands by 90 degrees just so that we don't have to do any anti-aliasing. So that's how you set up basic atlases, and then it leaves you a lot more room to easily manage your materials, because now we're only going to have 3 materials to deal with. All right, cool. I think that pretty much wraps up this quick overview of how I used the PSDto workflow on Return to Harry Hill, our short film. If you are interested in getting access to PSDto or PSDto-FBX, just check in the description down below and there should be some information for you to send you in the right direction, as we do not have a storefront for EDFilms anymore. If you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate all of your time. I hope that there was something useful for you that you can use on your own projects. I'm really excited to share with you more of what I learned during this very long process of making short film for cinema. So thanks again, and I hope to see you soon.